For 3 years after my wife Caroline died, I gave my son everything he wanted: the wedding, the car, the apartment, thinking it would keep us together. But when I found him and his in-laws lounging on my porch, having given away my home without my permission, I realized I hadn't been giving him support. I had been funding his disrespect. This is the story of how I took back my life's work. If you believe that respect is non-negotiable, make sure you subscribe and follow this journey. The 2-hour drive to Serenity Pines Lodge always felt less like a journey and more like a process of shedding skin. With every mile that disappeared in the rearview mirror, a layer of the city's grime, noise, and suffocating loneliness fell away. I'd passed the old miller's farm with its leaning silo, the landmark that always meant I was halfway there, and my grip on the steering wheel would loosen. I'd roll down the window, letting the air, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, fill the cab of my truck. It was a scent that always promised peace. Today, an old folk song Caroline loved came on the radio, one about rambling roads and coming home. I smiled, tapping my fingers on the wheel in time with the gentle guitar. "See, Caroline," I whispered to the empty passenger seat, still watching out for me. For 3 years, conversations like this, one-sided and whispered into the void, had become my new normal. The silence in my city apartment was a physical presence, a weight that settled in my bones. The lodge, or lodge, was the only place that silence ever felt peaceful, like a shared quiet instead of an empty one. Finally, the familiar turnoff appeared. The paved road gave way to the gravel lane I'd laid myself 2 decades ago. The trees formed a canopy overhead, dappling the path in shifting patterns of sunlight and shadow. I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to dissolve. This place was my sanctuary, the last bastion of a life that felt real. As I pulled into the clearing, the engine's rumble died, and the world went quiet, save for the hum of insects in the tall grass. And that's when I saw it. A gleaming, silver Mercedes, parked arrogantly in the spot where I always left my truck. It looked alien here. A piece of the city carelessly dropped into the heart of the woods. A cold prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. Then I heard voices. Laughter. It wasn't just a sound, it was a violation. This place was supposed to be quiet. I got out of my truck, the door closing with a soft thud that sounded unnaturally loud. I smelled wood smoke, but also something else, a cloying, expensive perfume that didn't belong with the scent of cedar. I walked the stone path, my boots crunching on the gravel, a rhythm that usually soothed me. Today it sounded like an intrusion. And there, on the wide porch that I had designed and built with my own 2 hands, was a scene so wrong it felt like a hallucination. My son, Leo, was lounging in my chair, the weathered oak recliner perfectly positioned to catch the last rays of the afternoon sun. Next to him, his wife, Sophia, held a wineglass, looking for all the world like the lady of the manor. Across from them, her parents, Richard and Brenda, occupied the wicker love seat Caroline and I had bought at a flea market on our 10th anniversary. A bottle of bourbon, my bourbon, the 20-year Pappy Van Winkle I had been saving for a day that now would never come, sat open on the small table between them. An ice bucket, one of our wedding gifts, sweated onto the cedar tabletop. They all looked up as my shadow fell across the porch steps. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. Leo's eyes met mine for a fleeting second before darting away. He busied himself swirling the amber liquid in his glass, as if it held the secrets to the universe. Sophia, however, stared right at me. A polite but completely vacant smile plastered on her face. "Clifford, we weren't expecting you," she said, her voice a little too bright. It was the same tone she used with waiters. She was about to complain about Richard, a man whose suits always seemed a size too small for his ambitions. Made a show of standing up. He smoothed his polo shirt over his paunch and offered a soft, manicured hand. "Clifford, good to see you. We can't thank you enough for your generosity. A bit of fresh air is just what Brenda needed." His words were smooth, practiced, but his eyes were busy. Scanning me, assessing me, dismissing me. I kept my hands at my sides. I looked past him, my gaze fixed on my son. "Leo, what is this?" He flinched, but didn't look up. "Dad, they needed a place to get away for a while. Their condo is being renovated. It's a whole mess with the contractors." "A place to get away," I repeated, keeping my voice low, and I could feel a tremor starting in my hands, and I clenched them into fists in my pockets. "This is my home. Leo, you don't just give the keys to my home away. You ask." Sophia let out a delicate, impatient sigh. "Oh, Clifford, let's be realistic. You're barely ever here. We drove by last month, and the place looked abandoned. It was just sitting here collecting dust. It's selfish to keep a place like this empty. Don't you think?" Her words hit me like a slap. Abandoned. I looked around the porch. At the small, intricate coasters I'd carved from a fallen cedar tree. One long, quiet winter. I saw the worn spot on the wooden railing where Caroline always rested her coffee mug each morning. A faint white ring that I could never bring myself to sand away. Every nail, every board, every imperfection was a story. And this woman, this stranger, called it dust. I felt a sudden, vivid memory surface. I was on this porch, in this very spot, with Caroline. It was just after we'd finished the final railing. She leaned her head on my shoulder, looking out at the lake. "You know," she'd said softly. "David was surprised. We put the deed in your name only." I remembered my lawyer, David Chen, asking the same question. "It's simpler this way," she'd continued, tracing a pattern on my arm. "This place is for us. Our anchor. No complications. No arguments. Just ours. And one day, it'll be your quiet place." My quiet place. And my son had filled it with noise. Brenda, who had been examining her nails with a look of profound boredom, finally deigned to speak. "It is a lovely property," she conceded, as if discussing livestock. "The structure is sound, a bit rustic for my taste. Of course, it could use a good airing out, and a professional cleaning." I saw a cobweb in the corner of the ceiling. The triviality of her complaint, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it, almost made me laugh. I focused back on Leo, my last hope. I tried to appeal to the boy I raised, the one who cried for a week when his dog died, the one who supposedly had his mother's heart. "Since when do you have the right to give away something that doesn't belong to you?" Leo took a deep, shaky breath. He set his glass down with a thud. Sophia placed a hand on his back. A subtle gesture of reinforcement. He finally looked me square in the eye. And the boy I knew was gone. In his place was a stranger, wearing my son's face like a mask. "You're not welcome here anymore." "Dad?" he said, his voice flat and rehearsed. This house is theirs now. The world didn't stop. The crickets kept chirping their evening song. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. The sun continued its slow and descent, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and violet. But my world had stopped. It had fractured. My own son, my blood, was not just disrespecting me. He was erasing me. He was erasing his mother. I felt the blood drain from my face. But I didn't let my expression change. I even managed a small, tight smile that felt like cracking glass. Is that so? Yes, Sophia said, stepping forward slightly. Her chin held high. She was the victor, and she wanted me to know it. We've all talked about it at length. It's for the best. You have your apartment in the city. They need this. Leo needs to prioritize his own family now. It's time you learn to share. Clifford. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Leo by the shoulders and shake him until he remembered who he was. I wanted to tell them about the mortgage I worked, double shifts to pay off, about the nights Caroline and I spent poring over blueprints at our tiny kitchen table, about the splinters and sore muscles and the pure joy of building something that was truly ours. But what was the point? They weren't listening. They didn't see a home filled with memories. They saw a free vacation house, an asset. I tried one last time, my voice barely a whisper. A final plea for a connection that might already be dead. Leo, just walk with me to the dock. Talk to me. Alone. He shook his head, his gaze dropping back to the floorboards. Dad, just don't make this a scene. Please. They're my family now. 2. You're making this difficult for everyone. Difficult. I was the one making it difficult. The memories of the last 3 years flashed through my mind. The wedding, with its ice sculptures and 5-course meal for 300 guests Sophia barely knew, all paid for from my retirement savings. The down payment on their first apartment because Leo's job was promising but not stable yet. The shiny new SUV I co-signed for because Sophia felt their old car wasn't safe. Each act of generosity, I now saw, hadn't been a gift. It had been a transaction. I had been paying for access to my own son. And now my credit had run out. I took a deliberate step back off the porch, my boot landing softly on the stone path. I didn't say another word. No curses. No threats. No goodbyes. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on them, on the son I no longer recognized, and walked away. The sound of my boots on the gravel was the only sound in the world. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the sound of something breaking. Each step was an effort, as if I were wading through thick mud. I could feel their eyes on my back. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing them raise their glasses in a silent toast to their victory. On my porch. In my home. I reached my truck. The familiar, dusty metal cool beneath my trembling fingers. I climbed in and just sat there. The keys cold and heavy in my hand. I stared through the windshield at nothing. My own breathing loud and ragged in my ears. My chest ached with a pressure so intense I thought my heart might simply give up. Then, a vibration. I pulled my phone from my pocket. A new message. From Leo. My thumb hovered over the notification. A strange sense of dread and morbid curiosity washing over me. I opened it. The words on the screen were stark, brutal, and devoid of any emotion. They were a judgment, a final nail in the coffin. The house is theirs for good now. Don't come back. There it was. Undeniable. Not a misunderstanding. not a temporary lapse in judgment. This was a premeditated act. A betrayal so complete it defied comprehension. I read the message again. And then a third time, letting the cold, hard finality of it sink in. The crushing weight of grief was still there. But now, something else was crystallizing in its place. It was a slow, cold burn, starting in my gut and spreading through my veins. It wasn't simple rage. It was the chilling clarity of purpose. I started the truck, the engine rumbling to life with a comforting familiarity. I put the gear in reverse and backed out of the driveway. The crunch of the gravel under the tires wasn't a sound of defeat anymore. It was a sound of departure. I was leaving the old Clifford behind. The soft, grieving father who gave too much and asked for too little. As I reached the main road, my hands, steady now, turned the wheel away from the city. I wasn't running home to lick my wounds. They thought I was a sad old man, a relic to be managed and eventually discarded. They had mistaken my quiet grief for weakness. They had forgotten that before I was a widower, I was a builder. I knew how to create things from nothing. And I knew that to build something new, you sometimes have to tear the old structure down to the studs. My phone lay on the passenger seat. I picked it up. My thumb scrolled through the contacts. Past the names of people who would offer sympathy I didn't want. I stopped on a name I hadn't needed to call in years. But a name that now felt like a lifeline. David Chen, the man who knew every legal line and every hidden strength of the fortress I was about to defend. I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Each ring a hammer blow of decision. Then, a calm, professional voice answered. David Chen speaking. David, I said, and my own voice surprised me. It wasn't the voice of a victim. It was steady. It was cold. It was the voice of a man who was about to go to war. It's Clifford. We need to talk. David, I said, and my own voice surprised me. It wasn't the voice of a victim. It was steady. It was cold. It was the voice of a man who was about to go to war. It's Clifford. We need to talk. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough for David to process the time of day and the tone of my voice. Clifford. Of course. Is everything all right? No. I said simply, but it will be. Are you in your office? I'm just leaving. But for you, I'll stay. Meet me there in 30 minutes. The drive to his office was a blur of streetlights and traffic. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of grief and shock, was now eerily calm, focused on a single point on the horizon. The rage was still there, a white-hot coal buried deep in my chest. But it wasn't controlling me. It was fueling me. I parked in the deserted underground garage of his building and took the elevator up to the 12th floor. The plush carpet muffled my footsteps. The hushed, orderly silence of the law firm, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the last few hours. David Chen's office was exactly as I remembered it, immaculate, organized, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. He was a small, precise man whose calm demeanor concealed a mind like a steel trap. He'd been my lawyer for 25 years. But more than that, he'd been a friend. He and his wife used to have dinner with Caroline and me once a month. He poured 2 glasses of water, slid one across his polished mahogany desk to me, and sat down. All right, Cliff, he said, his eyes full of genuine concern. Start from the beginning. And so I did. I told him everything, my voice never wavering. I described the scene on the porch, the Mercedes in my driveway, the bottle of my best bourbon. I recited the words Sophia and my son had said. I finished by taking out my phone and showing him the final text message from Leo. David read it, then read it again. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly, a habit he had when he was either deep in thought or containing a powerful emotion. When he looked back at me, his face was grim. The sheer audacity, he said, his voice a low growl. The unmitigated gall. He swiveled in his leather chair and typed something into his computer. A moment later. A printer in the corner whirred to life. He walked over, picked up the freshly printed documents, and laid them on the desk in front of me. It was the deed to Serenity Pines Lodge. Caroline was a smart woman, David said, tapping a paragraph with his finger. Smarter than both of us. Remember when we drew this up, she insisted on a sole ownership deed. Her name isn't on it. Leo's name isn't on it. It is in your name, Clifford Ames, and your name alone. Legally. That house is a fortress. Your fortress, your son and his freeloading in-laws are nothing more than trespassers. We can have the sheriff escort them off the property by sunrise. I looked at the black ink on the page. My name. A tangible anchor in the chaos. A wave of relief washed over me. But it was followed by something else. On eviction fell too simple. Too clean. It would be a slap on the wrist. A temporary inconvenience for them. Soon to be forgotten. They would paint me as the villain, the cruel old father who kicked them out into the street. It wouldn't teach them anything. The disrespect, the core of the problem, would remain. I pushed the papers back toward him. I don't want to just evict them. David. He raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? A legal victory isn't enough. I said, the idea beginning to take shape in my mind. They didn't just trespass. They tried to erase me. They tried to erase Caroline. They desecrated a memory. I want them to understand what they did. I want them to feel it. I don't want to just win. I want them to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that they lost because of their own greed. David leaned back, studying my face. He saw the cold fire in my eyes and knew I wasn't speaking from a place of fleeting anger. This was something deeper. This sounds like it goes beyond the legal. Cliff. It does. I confirmed. But the first part of the plan is going to need a different kind of expert. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent staring at my apartment ceiling, I made the second phone call. It was to a number I hadn't dialed in over a year. Kevin, it's Clifford Ames. There was a surprised but pleased sound on the other end of the line. Mr. Ames, wow. How are you? It's been a while. Kevin Tanaka was a brilliant kid. Now, a brilliant man in his late 20s. I'd met him through a mentorship program for at-risk youth a decade ago. He was a teenage hacker. A bundle of unfocused genius heading for trouble. I saw a spark in him, took him under my wing, and helped him channel that genius into a passion for engineering and tech. Now he ran his own successful smart home installation and security company. I'm all right. Kevin, listen. I have a strange project for you. A private contract. It requires absolute discretion and a creative mind. You've got my attention, he said, his voice instantly shifting from casual to professional. I met him for coffee an hour later at a small, out-of-the-way cafe. I laid out the situation, omitting none of the humiliating details. As I spoke, I saw his expression change from sympathy to a kind of righteous indignation on my behalf. He'd always had a fierce hatred of bullies and users. "So they just took it?" he asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Unbelievable. They believe they have—" I corrected him. "Now, here's what I want to do. I want to make them leave of their own accord. I want them to become so uncomfortable, so terrified of that house, that they run from it and never look back. And I want to do it without ever setting foot on the property myself." Kevin's eyes lit up. This wasn't just a job for him anymore. It was a challenge. It was exactly the kind of puzzle he loved to solve. "You want to haunt them?" he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Digitally." "Exactly," I said. "No damage, no physical evidence of tampering. Just a ghost in the machine. Can you do it?" He leaned forward, already sketching on a napkin. "Mr. Ames, we can do more than that. We can give them a full-blown, technologically advanced paranormal experience." For the next hour, we mapped out the blueprint for a nightmare. Kevin was a maestro, and I was his conductor. We devised a plan to install a series of wireless, remotely controlled devices, all hidden in plain sight or within the walls. We'd tap into the electrical and plumbing systems, motion sensors, temperature sensors, smart speakers smaller than a dime. The lights. I said, I want them to flicker, but not randomly. In a pattern. I thought of Caroline. Of her name. "Can you make them blink in Morse code?" Kevin's grin widened. "Child's play. What do you want it to spell?" "Her name," I said quietly. "Caroline. "That's beautifully cold," he said with genuine admiration. "Okay. What about audio? We can hide speakers anywhere. What do they hear?" I thought for a moment. A whisper. "I have hours of old home videos. Could you isolate my wife's voice? Maybe a single word. And distort it. Make it sound ethereal. Like it's coming from everywhere at once." I suggested the words. "Get out." "Done," Kevin said, scribbling furiously. "And the plumbing. We can install smart valves on your command. Every faucet in the house can turn on full blast. Cold water, of course, for maximum shock value." We planned it all. The smart thermostat would be programmed to drop the temperature by 20 degrees in 60 seconds. The television would turn on by itself, cycling through channels of static. It was a symphony of psychological warfare, and Kevin was its composer. Later that week, I met with David again to review the plan. He listened patiently, his face a mask of professional neutrality. But I could see the alarm in his eyes. "Clifford, I have to advise you. This is a minefield," he warned, ticking points off on his fingers. "You could be looking at civil charges for harassment, infliction of emotional distress. If they can prove it was you—" "They can't," I said calmly. "That's the beauty of it. Kevin's team will access the house when they're gone. He'll use burner phones and encrypted networks to control the system. There will be no digital trail leading back to me or him. And as you said, they are trespassing. What are they going to tell the police? The house we stole from my father is haunted." "And there will be no surveillance," David pressed. "No cameras. No microfones. None." I assured him. "I don't want to see or hear them. I just want them gone. Nothing will be damaged. Nothing will be broken. It will be a perfectly executed, completely deniable operation." David sighed, running a hand over his face. He knew I was going to do this, with or without his blessing. Legally. I'm advising against this. As your friend, be careful. Cliff. Kevin was a master of intelligence gathering. He tracked Sophia's social media and discovered they were all planning a weekend trip into the city for a gallery opening. That was our window. On a bright Saturday morning, while they were sipping champagne and looking at abstract art, Kevin's two-man team, disguised as local internet technicians, went to work. I spent the day pacing my apartment, my phone buzzing with updates. Kevin were in. No signs of them. Kevin Electrical is ours. Starting on the plumbing. Kevin all sensors are in place and hidden. They look like smoke detectors or air fresheners. We're ghosts. 6 hours later, the final message came. Kevin, we're out. The house is clean. And it's yours again. The system is armed and waiting for your command. The next few days were the hardest. I had to maintain absolute silence. Leo called twice. I ignored it. He sent a text. Dad, we need to talk about what happened. I didn't reply. My silence was a weapon. It would lull them into a false sense of security. Make them believe I had surrendered. During that time, I went back to David's office to discuss the next phase. The purely legal one. As we talked, my eyes wandered around his office and landed on a framed photo on his credenza. It was from a charity gala 5 years ago. In it, Caroline was beaming, pinning a small medal onto the chest of a uniformed veteran. I remembered that night perfectly. She was the guest of honor for her work with the Caroline's Compass for Veterans, a nonprofit she had poured her heart into, one that provided rest and recuperation for soldiers returning from overseas. An idea, far bigger and more final than a simple haunting, began to bloom in my mind. It was an answer to a question I hadn't even known I was asking. How do I truly protect Caroline's legacy? I pointed to the photo. She loved that organization. I said, my voice thick with emotion. David smiled sadly. She was their fiercest advocate. They named their library after her. You know, I looked from the photo of my smiling wife to the copy of the deed on the desk. And suddenly, the path forward was brilliantly, terrifyingly clear. I wasn't just going to take the house from them. I was going to give it to someone who deserved it. David, I said, turning to him, my heart beating with a newfound certainty. Hypothetically, what would the procedure be if I wanted to donate the lodge, the entire property? To them, to Caroline's Compass. David's professional mask fell away, replaced by a look of stunned comprehension. He slowly began to smile. Clifford, he said, that's not just checkmate. That's flipping the whole board over. A week passed, a long, silent, agonizing week. I existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting. I ate. I slept. I went for long, aimless walks, but my mind was at the lodge, waiting for the trap to be sprung. Then, on a Friday evening, as I was sitting in my quiet apartment, watching the city lights flicker on, my phone lit up with a new message. It was from Kevin. System is armed. Motion sensors on the driveway just tripped. A silver Mercedes. They're walking up to the porch. They're opening the door. They're inside. My breath caught in my throat. My thumb hovered over the screen, where a single, custom-designed icon now sat. It was a simple, glowing red button with one word beneath it. A moment later, another text from Kevin. They just turned on the lights and poured themselves a drink. They look pretty damn comfortable in your house. A final message appeared. A question that held the weight of the last 3 years. ready to push the button. Boss. Beneath his words, glowing on my screen, was the button itself. Activate. My thumb hovered over the glowing red icon on the screen. Activate. It was so simple, so small. A single point of light in my dark apartment. Yet, it held the weight of a lifetime, the weight of every concession I had ever made, every boundary I had failed to enforce, every time I had chosen the path of least resistance for the sake of a hollow peace. I looked around my living room. It was neat, sterile, and silent. The furniture was tasteful but impersonal. There were no memories etched into the walls here. No faint rings on the coffee table from a beloved mug. This was just a place I existed. The lodge, that was where I had lived. And they were in there right now. I could picture it perfectly. Richard would be holding court, pontificating about politics or the stock market, swirling my 20-year-old bourbon in his glass as if he'd earned it. Brenda would be subtly critiquing Caroline's decorating choices, while Sophia would be planning the renovations, mentally tearing down everything my wife and I had built. And Leo, my son, he would be sitting there, soaking in their approval, mistaking their parasitic attachment for the respect he'd never bothered to earn for himself. He was allowing them to do this, not just to me, but to the memory of his own mother. The thought solidified whatever hesitation I had left into a diamond-hard resolve. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was a reclamation. This was an exorcism. My thumb descended. I pressed the button. On the screen, the icon pulsed once, then changed to a cool, steady green. System active. There was no sound, no explosion, just a quiet confirmation. The first domino had been pushed hundreds of miles away. The ghost in the machine was waking up. I imagined them in the great room, the fire crackling in the hearth, the warm glow of the lamps casting a cozy light. Richard would be in the middle of a sentence, probably a self-important one. And then, the lamp on the end table next to him would just go out. A single point of darkness. He'd probably frown, annoyed at the interruption. Damn wiring in these old places. He'd mutter, taking another sip. Then, the overhead chandelier would follow, its 6 bulbs extinguishing at once, plunging the room into the flickering firelight. Brenda would let out a small gasp. Sophia would tell Leo to go check the breaker box, her voice already edged with irritation. But before he could get up, the lights would come back on. All of them. For a moment, everything would seem normal. And then the signal would begin. The lamp by the window. Blink. A pause. Blink, blink, blink. Another pause. Blink, blink, blink. I knew the code by heart. S. O. S. Just a little prelude from Kevin. A professional flourish. They wouldn't understand it. Of course. They'd just be confused. Then, after a moment of steady light, the real message would start. Blink. C blink blink. A blink blink. R blink. O blink. L blink. I blink blink. N blink. E. A steady, repeating pulse of light, spelling her name into the darkness of the room they thought they owned. It was a signature from the grave, a claim of ownership that no lawyer could dispute. I imagined Leo staring at it, a flicker of unease, perhaps even a sliver of forgotten memory, trying to pierce the thick fog of his entitlement, but Richard would dismiss it. Faulty dimmer switch. He'd declare with authority, "I'll have my guy take a look at it next week." Now it was time for the next layer. On my phone, I swiped to the audio controls. Phase 1. The whisper. I pressed the icon. A single sound wave. Miles away. A tiny, paper-thin speaker hidden behind a loose floorboard in the hallway would activate. It would emit a single, almost subsonic sound. The word, culled from a video of Caroline's 35th birthday party, was barely audible. Git. It would be so quiet. They'd think it was the house settling, or the wind whistling through the eaves. But it would be just loud enough to plant a seed of doubt. Brenda mai chiver, pulling her cashmere sweater tighter around her shoulders. Is there a draft in here, she'd ask? Sophia, ever the pragmatist, would scoff. It's an old house. Brenda, it's drafty. Leo, for God's sake, add another log to the fire. I gave it a full minute, letting the rhythmic lights and the unsettling quiet work on their nerves. Then, I activated the next set of speakers, the ones in the kitchen and the upstairs hallway. This time, the whisper would be a fraction louder. A different word. From a different memory, a clip of Caroline calling for our old dog, Buster, who'd wandered too far into the woods. Out? I imagined the four of them freezing. Richard would stop talking. The rhythmic blinking of the lamps would suddenly seem less like a faulty switch and more like a deliberate, menacing pattern. Did you hear that? Leo might ask, his voice a little shaky. Hear what? Sophia would snap, though her eyes would be darting nervously into the dark corners of the room. It's the wind. This place is in the middle of nowhere. Stop being so jumpy. But it was too late. The atmosphere of cozy victory was gone, replaced by a creeping, uncertain dread. They were no longer owners. They were intruders in a place that was starting to feel actively hostile. Time for the shock. My finger moved to the plumbing controls. This wasn't subtle. This was a sledgehammer. I pressed the icon labeled Deluge. Instantly, in the upstairs bathroom and the downstairs kitchen, smart valves connected to the main water lines would snap open. Every faucet would erupt at full. Violent pressure. The sound would be jarring. A sudden roar of rushing water filling the house. I pictured the scene with grim satisfaction. Brenda would be the first to scream as water began to seep under the bathroom door. Richard would leap to his feet, spilling my bourbon on the rug. What the hell is that? A pipe must have burst, he'd yell. A man whose entire life was predicated on being in control, now faced with a situation spiraling far beyond it. Leo, useless and panicked, would probably run towards the sound, only to be met with a cascade of icy water pouring down the main staircase. He'd slip, catching himself on the banister, his bravado washed away in a torrent of freezing water. They'd be yelling, slipping, their expensive shoes soaked, their sense of mastery of the house utterly shattered. While they were distracted by the flood, I activated the next phase. Nightmare. The lights wouldn't just blink now. They would strobe. All of them. In a chaotic, disorienting frenzy, plunging the room from blinding light to absolute darkness over and over. The tiny, hidden projectors Kevin had installed in the air vents would whir to life, casting distorted, elongated shadows that writhed and danced on the walls with every flash of light. They weren't human shapes. Not exactly. But they were close enough to make the primitive part of their brains scream in terror. And then, the final sensory assault. The thermostat. I dragged the temperature gauge on my screen from a comfortable 70 degrees down to its minimum setting, 38. In the lodge, the heating system would cut out and the air conditioning would kick on with a powerful, chilling blast. Within a minute, The air would turn frigid. Goosebumps would erupt on their skin. Their breath would start to mist in front of their faces. The cold wasn't just a temperature drop. It was a presence, a deathly chill that felt ancient and wrong. It was time for the ghost to speak clearly. I turned the volume on the audio system to maximum and hit the final button, expel. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a chorus. From every hidden speaker in the house, in the walls, under the floors, in the ceilings, Caroline's voice, layered and distorted into something both beautiful and terrifying, would speak. Get out. It would come from everywhere at once, from in front of them, behind them, above them, a clear, commanding, inescapable wave of sound. That would be the breaking point, the combination of the strobing lights, the writhing shadows, the impossible cold, the roaring water, and the disembodied voice would shatter their composure completely. The panic would be pure and primal. I could see it all. Sophia, who was always so put together, would be screaming. A rough, ugly sound of pure terror. Brenda would be weeping hysterically in a corner. Richard, his face pale and slack with fear, would be fumbling with the lock on the front door, his manicured hands suddenly clumsy and useless. He'd probably trip over the ottoman Caroline and I had reupholstered together, crashing to the floor. And Leo, he would just be standing there, frozen in the middle of the room, a statue of terrified incompetence, as the legacy he tried to steal literally screamed for him to leave. Kevin had a sensor on the front door. My phone buzzed. Door open. Another buzz. 4 heat signatures have exited the building. Rapidly. I started a stopwatch on my phone. The seconds ticked by. I imagined their mad scramble into the Mercedes, fumbling for keys, not even bothering to close the front door of the house behind them. Headlights would slash across the trees as they peeled out of the driveway. Gravel spitting from under the tires. Another buzz from Kevin. Vehicle has left the property. Estimated speed excessive. I looked at my stopwatch. 1 minute and 24 seconds. From the first flicker of the lights to their terrified escape. It was brutally efficient. For a long time, I just sat there in the dark. The green system active icon glowing on my phone. A profound, ringing silence filled my apartment. It was over. Phase 1 was complete. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The first easy breath I'd taken in a week. Then, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name. I now associated with nothing but weakness and betrayal. Leo. I let it ring. Listening to the shrill sound cut through the quiet. I let him stew in his terror and rage. On the 4th ring, I calmly tapped the screen to answer, putting it on speaker. What did you do? His voice was a hysterical shriek, thin and reedy with panic. In the background, I could hear Sophia sobbing and Brenda wailing. I said nothing. Did you hear me? What the hell did you do to the house? He couldn't even find the words. I let the silence stretch, letting him dangle. Finally, I spoke, my voice low, calm, and utterly devoid of the emotion he was spewing. I don't know what you're talking about. Leo. Don't lie to me, he screamed. The lights, the water, the voices. You sabotaged it. You did something. I looked out my window at the indifferent city lights. Maybe the house just doesn't like strangers, I said, the words tasting like ice and steel. Some places, they have memories. I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call, plunging him back into his own chaotic aftermath. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. My work wasn't finished. The psychological victory was sweet, but it was temporary. I needed to ensure this was permanent. I needed to burn the bridge so thoroughly they couldn't even find the ashes. I picked up my phone again, my thumb scrolling to David Chen's name. It was late, but I knew he'd answer. He did on the second ring. "David," I said, my voice clear and resolute. "It's me. They're gone?" "I figured I'd be hearing from you," he said. There was no judgment in his voice, only anticipation. "Let's start the donation paperwork now," I said. "First thing Monday morning. I want it done. They won't be coming back. Let's start the donation paperwork now," I said. "First thing Monday morning. I want it done. They won't be coming back." There was a moment of profound silence on David's end. The kind of quiet that signifies a major shift in the landscape. "Consider it done, Cliff," he finally replied, his voice imbued with a new level of respect. "I'll draw up the initial transfer documents over the weekend. We'll be ready to move as soon as the banks open on Monday." The weekend passed in a strange state of calm. The storm had broken. The fever had passed. And what was left was a quiet, cold clarity. My phone was a war zone. It started with a barrage of furious, incoherent texts from Leo. Then came the voicemails. Each one a different flavor of manipulation. There was the angry, accusatory one. There was the wounded, victimized one. There was even a tearful one, where he talked about how much Mom would have hated seeing us like this, a move so shamelessly hypocritical, it almost made me laugh. I listened to none of them more than once. I replied to none of them. My silence was a wall he could not breach. By Sunday afternoon, a new strategy emerged. The calls and texts now came from Sophia's parents. Richard left a blustering, vaguely threatening message about legal action and property damage. Brenda's was a masterclass in passive aggression, lamenting the terrible misunderstanding and the emotional distress they had all suffered. They were flailing, throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. Nothing did. On Monday morning, I was at David's office at 9 a.m. sharp. We spent 3 hours with a notary, signing a mountain of paperwork. With each stroke of my pen, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't losing a house. I was liberating a memory from those who were unworthy of it. That afternoon, the trap was set. David, in his most soothing and professional voice, called Leo. He didn't mention the haunting or the angry phone calls. He simply stated that he was representing me and that I was prepared to discuss a permanent resolution regarding the Mirror Lake property. He suggested a meeting on Wednesday, a chance for everyone to mediate the situation peacefully and discuss a potential transfer of assets. It was the perfect bait. The phrase transfer of assets was a piece of cheese in a mousetrap. Leo, hearing what he wanted to hear, believed my weekend of silence was a sign of surrender. He thought my strange stunt at the house was a final, desperate tantrum, and that I had finally come to my senses, ready to sign everything over. He eagerly agreed, confirming that he and Sophia would be there. Wednesday arrived. A cool and overcast day. I sat in David's largest conference room, the one with the panoramic view of the city skyline shrouded in gray clouds. A long, polished mahogany table stretched the length of the room. David sat at its head, a neat stack of files in front of him. I was on one side. On the other side sat a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and an air of quiet dignity. This was Eleanor Vance, the executive director of Caroline's Compass for Veterans. She had rearranged her entire schedule to be here, She understood the importance of this moment. The door opened, and they walked in, Leo and Sophia. They were dressed for battle in expensive, sharp-angled business attire. They looked sleek, confident, and utterly dismissive. Sophia surveyed the room, her eyes flicking past me as if I were a piece of furniture, before giving Eleanor a cursory, questioning glance. Leo just looked at David, a smug, impatient look on his face. "David," he said, not even bothering with a greeting as they took their seats opposite me. "Glad we could finally handle this like adults. I've brought our own counsel's contact information, just to ensure the paperwork is all in order." "That won't be necessary," David said calmly. Sophia placed a leather portfolio on the table with a soft thud. "We just want this to be over with. Clifford has been unwell. We're prepared to be generous, but our offer to take the property off his hands is the most compassionate solution for everyone." I remained silent. Watching my son and his wife perform, it was like watching a play for which I already knew the ending. Leo leaned forward, adopting a tone of feigned sincerity he must have learned from his father-in-law. "Look, Dad," he began, finally addressing me. "I know that what happened the other night was upsetting. Your behavior was erratic, and frankly, destructive. You caused significant emotional distress. But we're willing to look past that. We're willing to chalk it up to your grief. Just sign the house over. It's for the best. You can't manage it anymore. And it's a burden you don't need." He slid a pen across the table towards me. "Let's just sign. And we can all move on. Start to heal." I didn't touch the pen. I just looked at him. At the stranger sitting in my son's chair. David cleared his throat. A soft sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he said, his voice level and precise. "We are not here to discuss you taking ownership of the property." He paused, letting the statement land. Leo frowned in confusion. David continued, "There will be no papers for you to sign today. There is nothing for you to acquire." He looked from Leo to Sophia, his gaze unwavering. "Because as of 9/4/7 a.m., this past Monday, Clifford no longer owns the house." A slow, triumphant smirk spread across Sophia's face. She looked at Leo and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "See, I told you he'd come to his senses. He already did it." She believed I had secretly signed the house over to them to avoid this very confrontation. The sheer arrogance was stunning. David let her enjoy her perceived victory for a full 5 seconds. Then, he delivered the final blow. "No," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "He has not transferred ownership to you. He has, in fact, donated the entire property, the lodge, the boathouse, and all 27 acres of surrounding land, free and clear, to a new owner." He gestured gracefully towards the woman sitting next to me. "Leo, Sophia, I'd like you to meet Eleanor Vance. She is the director of Caroline's Compass for Veterans, a registered 501(c)(3) non-profit organization, and as of Monday, they are the sole, legal, and permanent owners of the property." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched their faces. It was like watching a film in slow motion. The smug confidence on Sophia's face froze, then cracked, her mouth falling slightly open. Her mind, so quick and conniving, it was struggling to process a reality it had not prepared for. Leo just stared, his face a blank mask of utter incomprehension. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking pale and ill. He looked from David to Eleanor, to me, and back again, as if trying to solve an impossible equation. Eleanor Vance chose that moment to speak, her voice calm and full of a grace they could never comprehend. On behalf of our entire organization and the countless veterans we serve, I want to express our profound gratitude to your father, she said, looking directly at Leo. His incredibly generous gift will provide a place of peace and healing for men and women who have sacrificed so much. We've already decided to name it the Caroline Ames Respite Center, to honor his late wife's legacy and her tireless support for our cause. That was the kill shot, the mention of his mother's name, used not as a tool for manipulation, but as a title of honor for the very thing he had tried to steal, seemed to finally break through his shock. Sophia found her voice first. It was no longer smooth and controlled, but a shrill, ugly shriek of raw fury. You did what you gave it away to strangers. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. That was our future, that was our inheritance. Do you have any idea what that property is worth? She pointed a trembling finger at me. You would rather give it to charity than to your own son. You selfish old man. You've destroyed everything. Leo finally spoke, his voice a choked whisper. Dad! Why? I had been silent for the entire meeting. Now, I looked at my son. I didn't feel rage anymore. I didn't feel hatred. I just felt a deep, profound pity. I looked at his panic-stricken face, at the woman beside him, whose true, ugly nature was now on full display. And I knew I had made the only choice I could. You're wrong, Sophia, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the table. I didn't destroy anything. I turned my gaze fully on Leo. You did. You destroyed it the moment you stood on that porch and told me I wasn't welcome. You destroyed it with every dollar I gave you that you took without gratitude. You destroyed it when you decided that the empty approval of these people was worth more than your father's love. I leaned forward slightly. Family isn't a bank account you can withdraw from until it's empty. Leo, it's a trust. It's built on respect and boundaries. You didn't just try to take a house, you tried to erase your mother. You stood in the place she loved most in the world, and you let these people, your new family, call her memory dust. You let them talk about tearing it all down. My voice remained steady. That house was never your inheritance. It was her legacy. And I'll be damned if I let you or anyone else sell it for spare parts. Now, her legacy will be a sanctuary for heroes, a place of healing. Something good will come from the space you tried to fill with your greed. I stood up. We're done here. I walked out of the room without looking back. Eleanor beside me. I could hear Sophia start to scream again. A string of curses and threats, but the sound faded as David closed the conference room door behind us, leaving them to their rage and their loss. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from any of them. David handled the few blustering legal threats from Richard's lawyer, which evaporated as soon as they were presented with the ironclad donation paperwork. The silence was a balm. One crisp autumn afternoon, I drove back to the lodge. A new, beautifully carved wooden sign stood at the entrance to the driveway, the Caroline Ames Respite Center. A project of Caroline's Compass for veterans. I felt a lump form in my throat. But it wasn't from sadness. It was from pride. The house was alive. There were a few cars parked in the drive, but not flashy ones. There were people on the porch, but they weren't drinking my bourbon. They were drinking coffee, reading books, talking quietly amongst themselves. A man with a prosthetic leg gave me a small, friendly nod as I walked up the path. A woman sitting in Caroline's old wicker love seat smiled at me. The air was filled with a sense of quiet purpose, of healing. The ghosts were gone. Eleanor came out to greet me, and we walked down to the dock. The water was still and dark, reflecting the brilliant colors of the autumn leaves. It's already making a difference. Clifford, she said softly, you have no idea. Caroline would have loved this, I said, and I knew it was true. This was the fulfillment of her spirit, of her boundless generosity. This was the right ending. We stood there for a long time, not needing to speak. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lake. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting it to be David. It was a text from Leo, his first communication since that day in the conference room. It was only 2 words. I'm sorry. I read the words. I thought about the boy I had raised, and the man he had become. I thought about the long, difficult road he might have ahead of him if he was ever going to truly understand the depth of his failure. I hoped he would find his way, but his path was no longer mine to pave. I didn't reply. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my gaze returning to the sunset. The sky was on fire, a breathtaking masterpiece of orange and purple. For the first time in 3 long years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. The house was safe. Caroline's legacy was safe. And for the first time in a long time, so was I.